Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about the anatomy of a Litmag. So pretty much this is the bones of what makes a Litmag, what makes one different from another, and it's really some of the questions and key signs of what you can be looking for to see if a Litmag's a good fit for your own work. So today's example is going to be from poet lore. So the first thing when encountering a Litmag that you see is the cover. They tell you to not judge a book by its cover. I'm going to tell you to totally judge Litmags by their covers. The cover really says something about the aesthetic values of a magazine. It tells you something, maybe sometimes about their budget. And it's your first encounter with a Litmag, so it's the first moment where you can either fall in love with or absolutely hate a Litmag. So with the example of poet lore, they always use a photo as their cover, and it's usually a historical photo. And the reason for this can be multiple-fold, but the main reason, I think, is because poet lore was established in 1889. And this is something that they really focus on in their advertising. They really are proud of their history, as they should be, being one of the oldest lit mags in the country. So history is a really big deal. It's really big in their aesthetic. It's really big in how they promote themselves and how they view themselves as an entity. And so therefore they choose covers that reflect history. And so that's something you want to be thinking about when entering a lit mag, but also you want to think about what the cover says it's in itself, standing alone. So they're always historical photos, and they always have some sort of human presence, which as a narrative poet I'm particularly interested in because it always creates some sort of narrative to me. So when you're looking at this, you see this girl looking out a window, and you kind of wonder what she's thinking about, who she is, where she is, and you kind of start creating and generating your own narrative just by looking at the cover. So for me, that's very engaging. And I wouldn't say that this is saying that poet lore only does like narrative work. They do a lot of narrative work, but that's not exclusively what they do. But I would argue that maybe the cover art is an indicator of wanting work that's maybe more in the narrative, kind of clear and direct kind of writing style. And then I would compare that to a magazine like Jubilat, which has really funky covers. So it's got a pink bat on it. And if you look through Jubilat, they have really funky stuff. They really like visual elements. They've got art, they've got work that's interacting, like letters interacting with art. And so it's not a hard, solid rule that the cover is going to indicate a style, but it can be it can lead you in a direction of making some of these categorizations of what styles and aesthetics a lit mag values. So a couple other things before we enter the lit mag. You'll notice that poet lore is bound. It's perfect bound. So this is in comparison to maybe some lit mags that are hand-stitched. If you look at Forklift, Ohio, they always do something different working with organic materials. So they'll stitch it, they'll put on, there's like one that's like got this almost plastic bubble wrappy kind of material. They'll always do something new, and it's always handcrafted. And this, in comparison, is perfect bound and printed. And so you want to be thinking about what kind of home you want your work in. Do you want something that is individually made, that's kind of almost its own piece of art because it's handmade, like Forklift, Ohio? Or do you want something that some people might argue is professionalized because of its large print kind of style? So that's something I want you to be thinking about. It may be an indicator of funding. Poet lore does have a lot of private funding, but they're not wealthy, super rich. Not that really any lit mag is super rich, but this can be an indicator that they do have that they have funding, that they have backers, and that may indicate a longevity for the work to be preserved. So if you're thinking that you want your work to really be in a lit mag that's going to remain and not become defunct, this may be an indicator of that. As opposed to one that's done by hand, they might not have a university or organizational backing. Just stuff to keep in mind. The other thing, which we'll kind of get to a little bit more clearly when I get to the table of contents, but poet lore in a lot of magazines list all the names of the contributors. So this is a great way when first encountering one. So if you're going to AWP or another book fair, what I do is I look at the cover. Does that excite me? I turn around. Do I recognize any names? So those are two real big things to see. Is it worth opening this lit mag? If you recognize any of the names, that can be a cool conversation starter too. I would go to some tables and be like, oh, I know Elizabeth, and that's just kind of a fun thing to be able to do. And it starts your connection with the lit mag. You know that writer's style, you know if that's going to be a good fit for you. So we're going to open the Litmag. First off, we get to the names of the people that are working on it. Like the back, this is a great indicator of seeing if you know anybody. So I have a connection with Poet Lore. I'm in the DC area. They're funded by, or they're published, I shouldn't say funded, they're published by Writer Center. So that's an organization in Bethesda that does workshops, they do writers events. And so I've gone to workshops there. And I've specifically gone to workshops by Jody Bowles. She is one of the editors. And so I built a connection with her by going to some of those events, which was cool. I got to hear kind of what she looks for in her magazines. She did a specific one about being an editor and what kind of things editors are looking for, which was really cool. And I know the other editor, E. Ethelbert Miller, because he came when I was an undergraduate to University of Maryland and talked. And I've also seen him at other readings. So that was cool. That helped me start to build a relationship with Poet Lore. I started submitting and I started addressing specifically to them and being able to say in my cover letter like, oh, hey, Ethelbert, it was great seeing you at X reading. Or Jody, it was great going to your workshop. So that's great to be able to have some sort of bridge with editors. And when you're addressing a submission, you definitely want to know the names of the editors so you can write the letter to a specific person. And then there's other names of other people that are involved. I know Jean Nordhaus for her poetry, so I got excited when I saw she was the review editor. So just looking over those real quick and kind of seeing whose names you know is really a great thing to do. The next gold gem of a magazine is its editor's page, or this is like a letter from the editor. So this is pretty much where the magazine says as clearly as it's going to of what it wants. Sometimes they'll highlight specific pieces for certain themes or certain values that they were trying to get at. It's really the editor's moment to talk about what they wanted to get out of this magazine issue. So it's really a great place of learning to kind of figure out if it's going to be a good fit for you. Sometimes they talk about specifics of what they want in work in general. For example, I think it was The Intentional. Somebody in one of my workshops picked that up, and they were talking, when we were talking about kind of what they learned through looking at Litmags, they said, oh, I looked at the editor's note, and it said it's for young, like late 20s in the DC area, and the woman was like in her late 50s, so she was like, I'm not going to really read this because I'm not in the 20s bracket. So that was a very clear moment where she was able to say, okay, I'm going to pick up the next one. So definitely make sure you take the time to look at this if you're trying to learn a new Litmag. It's usually not long. This one's literally just one page. So after we get to that, we usually get to the table of contents. And this is not the best example. I'll show you another one of where you can look for more information, because this is Poet Lore. So it's purely poetry. So if you're doing fiction, well, you're not going to send stuff to Poet Lore. If you do reviews, maybe you'll send it to Poet Lore. Let's see how many reviews they have. Okay, so they have one essay at the bottom. Sorry, it's backwards. And then they've got 1, 2, 3, 4. They've got 4 reviews. So if you do nonfiction, you might be able to find a home here, but you still have to have a passion for poetry, because that's really what they do. So let's look at Jubilat again. Let's see what their table of contents says. Okay, they don't have the dividers either. Well, usually when you look at the table of contents, they're going to have divisions of how much fiction they do. Oh, perfect. We've got Little Patuxent Review here to check out. So here you can see it a little bit clearly, even though it's backwards. So you see there's an entire page for poetry. There's 3 pieces of fiction, a couple interviews, piece of art, and a couple essays. So you think about your genre in proportion to this, and you say, what are my chances of getting into Little Patuxent Review? Well, I do poetry. I've got a good chance because there's a lot of space for poetry. At the same time, that probably means that they get a crap ton of poetry submissions. So you're probably competing against a lot of people. So a lot of spaces, a lot of people. You want to keep that in mind. Now with fiction, they only have 3 published. So either that means they don't set apart a lot of fiction space, or they don't get a lot of fiction submissions, or they don't get a lot of good fiction submissions. So this isn't going to tell you exactly what's going on, but you're going to see, well, they have 3 fiction slots. So the chance of me getting my fiction in might be pretty slim. With fiction, there usually are a lot of fiction submissions. In general, from my experience of talking to editors, what they often don't have a lot of, even, and you see because there aren't a lot of slots, is nonfiction. Most magazines really want more nonfiction, and they're not getting enough. So that's something to keep in mind. Make sure you're always looking at these table of contents for the proportions. But you also want to look for names of people you know again. So I see Arthur Zay, which is really cool. I know who that is, and I love his work. And I know some of these people from a regional relationship. A lot of them are from the area. But then there's some like Arthur that go beyond the area, and I've heard of them. So you want to just glance over the names, see who you know, and see what that indicates for style. Maybe it's people that you really admire. Maybe it's some people that you know, but maybe their work doesn't click with you. And just think about that. Think about what that means for whether you should submit or not. So then we get to the meat of the magazine. This is the most obvious part, is that there's going to be work. And in Poet Lore's case, it's going to be lots of poems. So I don't say you should necessarily read a Litmag front to back before deciding if it's a fit for you, but look at least 3 to 5 pieces. You don't want to just look at 1 or 2. You want to get enough that you can see a range of work, because they don't publish the exact same thing every single time. All editors value some element of diversity, even if they have a specific theme or a specific aesthetic that they hold to. So you want to look at a few, and you want to be asking yourself some of the pretty obvious questions, but like, is it engaging? Do you want to keep reading the piece, or do you get bored? Is it something that you could see your work? Does it remind you of certain poems or fiction that you've written? I love it when I look at a Litmag and I'm like, oh, that reminds me of my poem that I've been wanting to submit. And it makes me think of specific pieces of mine or specific like content that I'm working on. That's a great sign that this could be a really great fit for my work. And so you want to be thinking about that. You do want to have a relatively open mind, especially when you start. Maybe there's a couple pieces that just don't fit for you, and there might be more. So give it some time. But if you read 5 or so pieces and you're still not getting it, maybe you should pick up another magazine. So then you get through the content and you kind of make that, and then we get to my favorite part of Litmag, which is the contributors' bios. It sounds really boring, but this is, especially when you're starting out as looking at Litmags and getting to know the Litmags in the world, this is one of the best things to look at. So this is where contributors talk about themselves, their work, but largely they list like where they've been previously published. And so this is really helpful. If you read this and you're like, oh my gosh, I love Poet Lore and I want to like find other magazines like Poet Lore, this is a great place to do it. These people have been published in Poet Lore, so Poet Lore obviously respects their work. And this is going to be like, you're going to see, where did those people also publish? What other places also respected their work? And you'll often see trends. A lot of the same people will be published in a lot of the same magazines. So what I did when I was first starting out learning Litmags is I'd pick up one like this, go through, and I'd circle the names of Litmags I hadn't heard of, or that maybe I heard of a long time ago and was like, oh yeah, I need to submit to that. So then later I could go through and I could plug those names in and I could submit to those places and research them. So this is a gold mine for learning about Litmags, the contributors' notes. Other things you can get from the contributors' notes are other connections to self. So like if you know somebody, obviously, you might recognize places that they've been, but you also can see what kind of range the people are published in, as in like comparing to your own qualifications. So Poet Lore has mostly people that have been published pretty frequently, who have a pretty strong publication background. But now and then you'll see somebody who it says it's their first publication. Now you pick up other magazines like maybe Columbia Poetry Review, and there's a lot of contributors that are students there, undergraduates and graduates. And so you kind of think to yourself, where do I fit in with those contributor bios? Do I really fit in with the same kind of level of professionalization that they have? Or is it like above where I am? Like, is it my later goals? We're going to talk next week about setting goals. Or is it somewhere you've already been? Like maybe you have your PhD or something and you're like, I don't want to be published with undergraduates. So this is a great indicator of where people are and putting yourself in that place and seeing if you would fit in. And so, of course, the message overall is you're seeing, is this a home for my work? Is this a place I'd be proud to have my work be in? Would I be proud to be next to these poets or fiction writers? And would I be able to just show off this magazine and feel like awesome about it? So that's going to be different for everybody, what that means, what your personal goals are for getting your work published. But hopefully by seeing examples, you're going to start feeling like you get an idea of what you value and what you don't. So after this video, you're going to see the assignment of how we're going to apply what we just learned.